So I'm stepping in as Timo Lunsford. I'm in the middle of finalizing a book. I wrote it in 100 days for my late partner. It wasn't really 100 days. I wrote it in 7 years, and then I compiled it in 100 days. But the last chapter of the book is a call to action for the relationship movement. And the big idea of one of the pieces that I talk about is that technology is just eating the world for lunch, like just absolutely killing all of us and putting us in a space of Dan's term, which I love, relational poverty. So I have 3 quotes for you to ponder today. The first one will date some of you, but since some of you are older than dirt, how many of you remember the Box Tops, the group The Box Tops? I'm trying not to look at Bob. Bob, do you remember the Box Tops? All right, well, they came out with a hit in October 1967 called Neon Rainbow. And here's a lyric from that song. It says, "What they find, the glow erases. What they lose, the glow replaces." And I love that because as technology or the glow, the puppy or society, as the technology, the glow gets bigger and bigger, artificial intelligence, blockchain, metaverse, social media, all creating dopamine loops that essentially turn us into lesser versions of ourselves. It replaces and erases genuine connection. Put another way, there's never been a more important time in human history than right now to seek genuine friendship with others. So those of you guys that have kids with cell phones, they're likely struggling with friendships. And for those of you in this room that don't have a small group that you meet with and don't meet with regularly, you might be struggling with friendships too and not even know it. Second quote from Zig Ziglar, which I like: "If you go looking for a friend, you're going to find they're very, very scarce. But if you go out to be a friend, then you'll find them everywhere." Think of your best friend or best friends. This is the part where audiences participate. What are some adjectives that you would use to describe great friends?
Trustworthy.
Trustworthy. Heinemann. That's awesome. I use that one in just a second. What else?
Loyal.
Loyal. Loving. I love it.
Reliable.
Accountable. I heard reliable. I love it. I wrote this down. Whatever your spiritual disciplines are, however hard you hit your knees in prayer or daily surrender, however many Bible plans you read through Advent, or however high you raise your hands in worship on Sundays, whatever your spiritual practice is, if it's not making you more honest in your relationships, it's not working. And then finally, the third quote, love this. Regardless of who said it, "I did not become intentionally internationally famous, but boy, did I get close. I got near enough to success to smell the stench of it. It smelt like burnt cloth and rancid gardenias. And I realized that the truly awful thing about success is that it's held up all those years as the thing that would make everything all right. But even after experiencing all those victories, I've come to one conclusion. The only thing that makes life even slightly bearable is a friend who knows what you're talking about." Isn't that great? A friend who knows you're talking about. That could actually be a sub-tagline for our church, certainly for Journeymen. And so now I get to introduce a friend like that of mine. Mr. Spencer Williams. Spencer always seems to know what the heck I'm talking about. And if he doesn't, he asks questions until he does, even if it's 11 p.m. and Mike Schramm is falling asleep and has a 90-minute drive ahead of him. Spencer will keep asking questions. I wrote down he possesses unparalleled maturity wrapped in a 32-year-old body, who's a cornerstone GM in the number 325 of the Fortune 500 companies. You guys were 326 last year. Then you got more important, and now you're 325. I see the trend. Doing 12.55 billion in sales, all I wrote down while driving a faster, cooler, better Porsche than you'll ever own. We took our boys to the Jurassic Park exhibit downtown. Me, Spencer, Teddy, and Declan went, and I asked Declan what was the best part of the dinosaur exhibit, the best part of the day, and his exact words were, when Enter Sandman came on the ride home and we all rocked out. And I'm like, that is the only correct answer. That's my son. I was so proud. And then we role play it. I'm like, when mom asks, we were going exactly the speed limit. It was fantastic. My favorite part about Spencer, he would give it all up to live in a studio apartment if he felt it would serve his family. In fact, I bought Spencer a coffee mug once, and written on the side, I asked his wife for a few words that she would use to describe him. Just a couple that came to mind. Sometimes this can be challenging for wives when they need to create sensitive adjectives for their husbands. Not for Audrey. She said, selfless, generous, encouraging, proactive, initiating, fun, active, supportive, funny with 3 exclamation marks, adventurous, engaging, smart, and loving. And then she had 3 wink faces and then an eggplant emoji, which I'm pretty sure highlights his love of cooking and barbecue for all of his friends. Just awesome. Spencer doesn't lead by title, he leads by relationship, which he earns with honesty and intentionality. I got the chance to see one of his keynote speeches that he gave earlier this year in Barcelona. This is Spencer, by the way. Young 30-something-year-old Spencer talking to a bunch of senior executives, multimillionaires, and most impressively, MBAs. Wow. MBAs.
Most impressive.
Or as I call them, mediocre but arrogant. Also, master of bad advice. I thought that was a good one, but my very favorite was married but available. That's the godly one there. Do any of you have your MBA, by the way?
Not.
That's what Spencer and I think of you. Here are my 3 favorite quotes from that speech. Spencer said, "If you don't like change, you'll like irrelevance even less." He said, "Don't shoot the messenger, but coasting will kill you." And he ended his speech with, "There's no growth without change, no change without loss, no loss without pain. So if we're not hurting, we're not leading." I mean, is there any better guy to be talking today about communicating in truth than frickin' Spencer Williams? Hey, I'm doing a subpar job being you. Hey, Timo. By the way, apparently he's been this way his whole life. I asked his dad, Wayne, whom some of you know, for more Spencer and his quest for clarity stories. And Spencer, I don't even know if you know this story. This one's good. You were 12 years old. Your mom, Tarina, and your dad were having a discussion in the living room, and Spencer was pressing the issue really hard of why can't Mitch and I do this thing, but you guys can. And Spencer's argument was apparently so good and so love and logic and so infallible that Wayne resulted to the last great fatherly act of defiance, which was, because I said so. Mom and I need to go pray about this. Do you remember this? He doesn't remember. This is fantastic. So he stormed out of the room. Tarina came in the other room laughing. She's like, "Now what do we do about this genius?" And he's like, "Well, first we got to pray because that's what I said we were going to do, but I had to get out of there before he beat me." And there comes a time in every man's life when your son beats you at a thing you pride yourself in. Spencer was engaging in his sincerity safaris even at a young age. And finally, a story some of you guys know, this one from adulthood. Spencer was with John Townsend and Wayne with a bunch of Telect managers. He had worked his way up to a significant vice president role, and there he was, finally, at the big kid table. And for those of you that have been invited to the big kid table for the first time, usually the normal thing to do is to mind your place, know your role, and shut your mouth until you earn the respect. However, Spencer had a belief, and he wanted to shift an allocation of funds. I'm guessing fiber. Was this the fiber conversation? So Wayne was saying, our money is in power, and Spencer kept asking, why? What about this? Have you considered that? Master question asker. And finally, John Townsend turns to Wayne and is like, Wayne, what are you afraid of? What is it about what Spencer is saying that's too risky? And Wayne had to concede, well, there's nothing. Take care of the people and let's do it. And the impact of that for Wayne, he confided in me while reflecting, is that how he had lived his professional journey the same exact way as you have. And here it was coming back full circle, son challenging lovingly, mechanically as a selling point of innovation. Many of you have heard that story, but to hear Wayne tell it, it's so clear it's one of his most proud moments of his career. Little did they know, Telek, that that would be a watershed decision for the business, and one of the two key moments that would eventually result in the business selling to Amphenol, and that Spencer would be the non-negotiable of coming over with them, or else we're not buying the company. That's how freaking good this guy is. One of my best friends and favorite people born on planet Earth, this side of eternity. Give it up for Mr. Spencer Williams!
Well, the worst way to start a presentation is, dog on yourself, but that was quite the introduction, so thank you, Mike. And today I am gonna actually look at my notes. Normally that's not my style. I'm not like Mike walking through the crowd and a hype man, so we'll have to go through it. We're gonna talk about communicating in truth, which, if you don't mind hitting me with the next slide, Kevin. But first, I'll go through the actual real introduction of myself, not the inflammatory, extreme introduction. Up here you have my family in the top right. This is my wonderful, loving wife, Audrey. In the center we have our team in Guadalajara, which I'll be there next week, unfortunately, because I'd rather be home. But that's all part of communication, being honest and transparent. Up here we have my dad, my brother, and I hunting this fall. All of us were successful because it was a great hunt. And this is my wonderful small group, which unfortunately is this rowdy crew up here. As you know, Mike has no filter, and neither do I, which we'll find out later in the presentation. But Kevin, if you don't mind going over here, or to the next one. So I put kind of definitions behind this. I have these photos up here just to kind of give you guys an image of context of who I am. Mike said I'm a general manager of Amphenol Network Solutions. Our company actually makes fiber optic products, at least my division. We make fiber optic products. We also make power protection products for data centers and telecom companies out there. And my family is obviously my favorite thing in the whole entire world: Audrey, Georgia, Teddy, and Zoe. And I put some other roles up here because we're going to talk about communication across all of our relationships and how I have failed in many ways over the years and tried to learn and continue to learn. Dan and I had coffee yesterday talking about how I'm still learning, and thank God gave me this opportunity to speak about it because I needed to learn from the greatest of all time. Also, Son of God, journeyman, we're all here as apprentices to the Lord, and also looking up to his authority. If you don't mind, Kevin. Okay, so my problem statement, this is Zach Galifianakis up here, trying to do Rain Man math here. This is what I struggle with, and I want to start out first to say that I'm not an expert here. I think that this was just as much for me as it was for everybody in this room to walk through. But I suck at communicating as all of these. So who in the room is perfect at communicating at all of these? Nobody? Who's good at communicating at one of these areas at one time? So I think that for me has been the biggest struggle, is going from point to point to understand our relationships and our scenarios and how we communicate. And so today we're going to talk about how Jesus communicated in the Bible and modeled, we're asked to be like him, modeled the perfect communication methods. And hopefully at the end we wrap up in many communication methods that he didn't use, that for some reason I continue to use in my daily life, whether that be with my wife, my employees, my boss, or even the boss. So Kevin, if you don't mind going to the next. So what are the stakes? This is a gravestone. I did change it to dang hard, but this is what I told my wife to put on my gravestone. Tried dang hard, because I think that's all I can do in this world. But Proverbs 12:6 says, "The words of the wicked lie in the wait for blood, and the mouth of the upright delivers them." So effectively, if we aren't communicating in a good manner, a manner that people respond to, and communication's a path for two: one receiving, also handing off. The stakes are really high. right? We could be a false witness. We could be leading somebody towards making a poor decision. Many of you guys are leaders of businesses here. You could make a poor decision by terminating an employee that probably didn't deserve to be terminated, or you guys could be making a decision by keeping an employee that probably should be terminated, and it hurts the greater collective. And we'll talk about some examples later on. So Kevin, if you don't mind going up here. So I as I went through this kind of method of looking at, okay, how do we communicate effectively? Where do I fail? That's typically how I start. Where do I fail? Where's the problem, and how do we solve it? These are some questions that I listed out as kind of a building block for how I need to, don't always, but need to enter every communication scenario. And the first one is, who am I communicating with? We had that list of all the relationships that potentially could come up in our life. And that list often I blur, right? I communicate with my wife in a way that I would normally communicate with an employee of, hey, Audrey, go do this. That typically doesn't work in my marriage. And then the second of, what is the situation and what are the stakes? This is another scenario of Reed's a awesome influence. You guys all know Reed. It's hard not to know Reed. Such an amazing guy. We call him our cleanup hitter at the end of every small group. We're all trying to give advice, and then Reed comes in and makes us all look bad. But what's the situation? What are the stakes? And recently, in my personal life, my wife and I, we're going through some communication challenges, and I picked up the phone and called my journeyman, right? Hey, I need some support here. And Reed, brought up that term of, you're going into a high stakes conversation. And that was something that I didn't really think about in that conversation. I was more kind of like, oh, well, this is what I got to prove. This is what I got to fix, and typical management style. But I think that's really important, and often we don't really look at that. What are the stakes? Where we don't judge it correctly. And the second is, what authority do I have? And I do have a slide here to talk about the authority present. But, if in a spousal relationship, who's the boss in their marriage? I'm not going to put my hand up. How about you, Dan? Absolutely. That's great. That's great. It is being recorded. Yeah. And then, how do I love and lead like Jesus? This is something that we need to look at. And I'm going to put together some scenarios in the Bible. We will hop in there. But then, what state am I in? That's something my dad's always asked me of, do you respond? Mike actually shared a really good example of me at 12, apparently, arguing with my dad. He realized the state that he was going to go into was probably not a good state, so he separated himself. And often, I don't know if you guys are like me, I want to react rather than be proactive communication. We do have a lawyer in the back. You sometimes have to react, right? Occasionally. And then, do I need counsel, and what communication method is effective? All right, Kevin. All right, I put the GOAT, greatest of all time. We're going to talk about what Jesus did, and then we'll circle back and land the plane. Okay, first one is starting off easy. We all know the parables of the lost son, prodigal son. You have this situation where Jesus is explaining really God's forgiveness and grace. So I wanted to walk through and what questions, how would we answer those same questions in this model of Jesus? First is, who's he communicating with? It's the disciples. What are the stakes? I put medium, not because they're not high, right? These are the guys that are going to build the, pass on the faith as we go forward. But medium because Jesus knows he's living his life with them. And he knows he's going to have to probably remind them over and over again of this message. And then, obviously what authority? He's Jesus, but at the same time, he does have, this relationship with God at this point when he's Son of Man here. He still is under some authority here. And, of course, is he loving? It's Jesus. Is he gracious? He's in this gracious, good mood at this point. And did he seek counsel? Jesus always seeked counsel, right? I think Dan's talked a lot about, hey, Jesus How many times does he go out and seek rest or go into the woods and pray and speak to God? And this is a perfect example of a communication method that I think we can all take from Jesus, of using stories, training, how we would do it in a scenario or how somebody else did it, and try to put some imagery around it. This is not often, we'll talk about a husband and wife thing, how my wife wants to hear it of, hey, this is what I did over here and this is what you should do. But hey, it's a good communication method. I put this picture of a father and a son fishing up there just to use the example of where I would maybe use that communication method. Next is direct and sometimes tough to swallow. So here, this is where Jesus in Matthew 19, 16 through 22 talks about the rich and the kingdom of God. Jesus explains that we must sell our possessions and follow him. And in this scenario, it wasn't taken well, right? I mean, it talks about the end, right? I think the boy leaves in sadness, or the man leaves in sadness because he's wealthy. This is a scenario that I often can compare in my work environment, of sometimes having that direct conversation with the employee that maybe you don't want to have. But Jesus is clear. There's no vagueness here. There's no like, hey, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to do. You need to drop it, or drop your possessions and follow me. And he doesn't like try to comfort the guy in there. It's just a direct conversation, and I think he models that very well here. All right, Kevin. I'm going to try to stay on time. I'm notorious for blowing through time, and I did not time this one. And here we have communicating with passion. So often I think, how many of you guys like to yell? Be honest. How many like to yell? Yeller? Is yelling always angry? So I think here often people say, well, Jesus gets angry. But Jesus is clearly passionate about the cause. He's not passionate about the people. He's not hateful in his anger. He's not saying, I hate you, Pharisees. I hate you, people who are ruining this. He's talking about, hey, I hate what you're doing, because what you're doing, the outcome isn't okay. So who's he communicating with is the opposition. The stakes are high. They're being a bad influence. He's the ultimate authority. He's passionate. You could argue the anger point, but we'll talk about, I think, where we sometimes, mislead passion with anger. Aggressive but loving, and with the collective in mind. He understands. I talked earlier about the employee that might be toxic in their environment. Jesus sees that this thing is going to cause a bad outcome for everybody else, and this is an area where he used communication and leadership to solve the problem. Reactive, but it's Jesus. I'm sure he did pray about this because he probably knew it was coming. And what communication method was effective? It was anger, passion, and this direct communication model. If he walked in and said, hey guys, you probably shouldn't do this. Maybe you just kind of, clean this up a little bit and I'll be back next week to see if it's better. That wouldn't have been effective at all, but people walked out and said, wow, this guy's a little bit crazy and we probably need to respond. How many people in the room who raise their hand that like to yell think yelling over and over again is effective? That's another area where as I looked through this communication speech today, I was, you don't see Jesus yell very often. And when he does, it makes an impact. And I think that this is a communication method that is very effective, but what I've seen, especially leadership in my work, is the people that yell the most, often people don't even listen to it at that point. Do you guys have people like that where you're just like, yeah, you yell every time I talk to you and nothing's important? Does anybody have anybody in their work that sends emails that are always urgent? What do? Delete. Put them at the bottom of the inbox because they're not urgent. Especially when it's like for shirt sizes for a trade show or something. Happens. Okay, so we'll go to request or the next one. So Matthew 26, 36 through 44, this is his prayer in Gethsemane. I don't know. I can't even say it. I'm not even going to try. But this is when the night of his betrayal, when he is asking and pleading God. This is where he is not the authority figure. And I wanted to use this because, and Dan might correct me on my theology later after all this. So Dan, do we need to have coffee this afternoon so far? Okay, so far. Okay. Just want to make sure. It's always nerve-wracking, you know. But this is where, you know, he's under authority to God. He knows what's the outcome, but he is calm, cool, collected, and he still asks. He says, "Can you take this cup from me?" And he knows, and at the end he submits. And I think this is super important when any of us, who in here has a boss, like a real boss? I do. So at times, like, hey, making this clear communication, Jesus models this very well of saying, hey, this is what I need, this is what I want, and he knows the answer, but he still asks. Some of us don't know that answer, but in the end, effectively, he's submitting because he knows that there's not a negative outcome. That doesn't mean we always have to submit if our boss is telling us to embezzle money or something like that. But he uses this very effectively. And I asked that question of who's the boss in their marriage because, and I put this picture up here, not because God says that the wife should have authority over the male, but this is a perfect example of having conversations with our spouse. At least this was for me of, hey, I don't think this is great. And understanding that there are times to submit and there are times to treat, well, not our times, we are all asked to treat our spouses as Christ loved the church. And Christ models this perfectly to say, we love you, and this is a more effective model of communication that he modeled for us. Kevin? All right, communication through silence. We got the hipster with the wheat. It's beautiful outside. This is where Pilate and Jesus, right? He asks. This is the prophecy. This is in Isaiah. This is in Matthew, where he was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and a sheep before its shearers is silent. So he did not open his mouth. How many people are good at responding in silence? Is it effective sometimes? Have you used it? I have. It's kind of weird, but it works. And I think he models this perfectly here where he says, he knows the outcome. He didn't get defensive in the situation when Pilate asks him the questions he's asking him. He doesn't come back and say, well, yeah, I'm better than you, whatever. He knows what he needs to do, and that's responding in silence. And I think that this is a great model for all of us to think of when do we use this, because I don't think we use it often enough, especially as leaders, where we think we need to be the, Mike, you made that joke out of the gate. We need to be that guy that walks up on the stage and yells at people and says, we know where we need to go and you better go do it. That's a lot more comfortable for a lot of us than just say, no, I need to think about that, or silence in general. All right, next slide. This is where it gets really fun. First bullet, I actually used some animations here. What did he not do? He never got defensive. And this is interesting. I didn't bring up the verse here, but even when the devil is attacking Jesus, he doesn't get defensive if he responds with facts. He doesn't. He easily could say I da da da, I da da da, I da da da, but instead he responds with facts. How many people respond in a defensive manner? How many people do it a lot? I can't reach any higher. My wife reminds me that I do it a lot. But this is an area where he never modeled, and we're asked to live like Christ. He didn't model this at all. Kevin? All right, he never used condescending communication. Even when he was direct, there was never an attack on the actual human being themselves. Even when he tipped over tables, it wasn't saying, hey, you're a total idiot, and why did you do this? This is what it says. But how often do we use condescending communication with our employees, with our kids? Anybody do that with their kids? I do. It's not really great. I feel bad about it every time I do it. But I definitely have used it too often. Next one, Kevin. All right, again, speaking in anger without love. This is an area Jesus never uses. Kevin, I may have not needed animations on everything, but we have a lot of them to come, so just to slow it down. Avoiding a difficult conversation. How many people as a leader have ever avoided a tough conversation? So when something's happening in your organization, or you know somebody isn't performing well, you know they're treating others with disrespect, you're like, you know what, I'm gonna get to that next week, maybe the week after, or maybe in 6 months. Did Jesus ever do that? No, he knew the communication needed to happen right then and there, or it didn't. And he modeled that very well. And I feel like from a communication perspective for me, I often wait too long. One of the things, Wayne's going to listen to this, he begged that it get recorded, but one of the things Wayne, my father, said when I worked with him, when I let a guy go, I remember having the conversation of like, hey, I went through his inbox, you know, and that's never do that, by the way. Do it just for the customer thing, but then when you start digging, don't do it, stop. And then you find out that there's a bunch of bad stuff, or you find out, hey, he's only sent like 12 emails in the past 3 months. The guy hasn't even been working. That happened. And I remember bringing that up, and he said, you know, when you fire somebody, you're often 6 months too late. I was like, well, you're probably right. Which, by the way, I don't encourage you to just go out and fire everybody, but it's often right. And I don't even think it's necessarily because of what we don't know and what's happening. I think often it's the leader's fault for avoiding that difficult conversation for so long. You know it in the back of your mind. When there's smoke, there's fire. You have to have the conversation. You have to drive towards it. He never uses passive communication. This is my favorite one. I love being passive. Hey, we should probably do the dishes. My wife loves that one. We should probably do the dishes. What do you mean we? You sure? Sure it's not me? You want me to do it? But this is an area that I really struggle with consistently, where it's not clear, it's super passive, and people can't understand. And then often I result in anger afterwards when I'm like, why didn't you get this done? And they're like, well, I thought we were going to do it. And you were going to schedule a meeting, or you're going to do this, and there was going to be some follow-up. And it's super, you know, you kind of have to give them some grace there sometimes, because you're like, yeah, maybe I was kind of passive in that conversation. All right, fix an individual outside of free will. You ever tried to fix your spouse? Has it ever worked? If so, let's huddle up afterwards. I want to know. No, he doesn't do this here. He doesn't, he explains the facts through his whole entire life of what you need to do to get to the kingdom of heaven, what you need to do to be, to follow him. But he never, even that guy that he could have easily slapped over the head and said, sell your riches right now. He could have made the guy do it, right? I mean, Jesus is God, and effectively he could have. But he never does. He challenges them with what they need to hear, but he doesn't actually say, I'm going to come fix you. And I think that's really important for all of us to remember as leaders in the community even. Like, how many people have, I think they're calling it Trump derangement syndrome right now, who are so mad at everybody else. You're mad at everybody else because you think you're better than everybody else and you can go fix it. And the truth is we all collectively are human beings that have a diverse view on everything. And I think this is another area that I found myself really struggling with. All right, this correct the way someone achieved an outcome. This is my favorite story that I use at work too often. My wife gets embarrassed every time. It's not her fault, but this was early in our marriage. And I'll tell you this story. Early in our marriage, she said, hey, we're going to clean the house. It's like, great. So it wasn't passive. It's like, we're going to clean the house. So I start cleaning the house, and she's like, you get the downstairs bathroom. I'll get the upstairs bathroom. You guys probably heard this. And I get the downstairs powder room bathroom, and I start cleaning the toilet. And she comes down, and she's like, no, that's not how you clean a toilet. I said, well, you told me to clean the toilet. And so she came over and she's like, well, you do it this way and this way. And so I did what any mature husband would do, and I walked straight to the fridge, grabbed a beer, turned on the football game, and I sat on the couch until she finished cleaning the whole house. And I still use this today with our leadership team. Is you tell people to clean the toilet, you don't tell them how they have to clean the toilet. And Jesus didn't do that. He never said you must do this ritual and this ritual and this ritual and this ritual to get to the kingdom of heaven or to be right with God. He said this is how you get there. And whether if the outcome is for love, loving God and loving one another, he doesn't care how they get there. But how often as leaders do we find ourselves falling in this trap? All right, this is a transition slide to the next transition slide. How do we communicate like Jesus? Seek first to understand. Next transition slide. All right, with your wife. Okay, good. The animations worked for this one. I have a Mike joke in here. I'm kidding. Okay, with your wife. Your wife is not an employee. This has never worked for me, and actually vice versa. We are not employees to our wife. And I think that this in marriage, at least for me, has been a struggle in communication, even when I come home and it's like, I want my wife to be direct in communicating with me, but I don't also want her to be like, go get this done within the next 25 seconds and go, set objectives and key results like I do with my team of when's this going to be done? Is it going to be done by Q1, Q2, whatever? Like I need to know. We can't communicate with our wives like they're employees. That's pretty factual from my perspective. And the next thing for me, again, this is just my humble experience, has been my wife doesn't want a story about how my work experience aligns with the situation we're going through. So I've made this error quite a bit. Of like, yeah, this is kind of like when we did this in Mexico and we shut this down over here and she doesn't want that story. I highly recommend against it. And then reminding ourselves, let's not use any of the communication styles Jesus doesn't use. And I'm going to be honest here and transparent. This list I use more than what Jesus uses in his modeling. I use this list a lot. I love this list. This is what I go back to. Being defensive, being passive, condescending, angry, avoidant, solving, correcting. These are all things that I think I am really good at. And I'm reminded every time I go into any communication situation, and you'll see this bullet up there on every relationship we have, it fails. But yet I go back to it because for some reason I think I'm really good at it, And I'm sarcastic by nature, so the passive and condescending is really fun for me. And then, always seek counsel when stakes are high. I brought up the Reed conversation, and I hadn't really thought about that in my life of the high stakes. I've been married to my wife for 11 years, love her dearly, but there's some conversations that are super important on how they're delivered, and there's some conversations of cleaning the toilet that can probably be, your wife's not, gonna slap you across the face for that conversation, but you might get a slap, but it won't be, that's not high stakes. This is an area that I need to continue to remind myself as a husband here. All right, ask the questions. I changed this. This was, I'm not gonna say who it was, but definitely somebody in my journeyman. Used different acronyms here. Does she need to be listened to? I didn't put any model. I didn't put any model up here. They're already laughing, which is great. I didn't put a model of Jesus here, but there are often times we talked about when Jesus was silent. There are often times, more often than not, Jesus is listening. He's not necessarily speaking. And I always want to respond in communication with my spouse in all right, yeah, let me fix it, or what do you need? I think, Dan, you've even used the not about the nail sermon at one point. Next one, does she need help and guidance? Kevin, you cannot hit them too quick, so wait till I say next one on this one. Does she need help and guidance? This is another one, like asking that question, like verbally. not just assuming it. I always assume it. That's where I start. I don't go, does she need to be listened to? But asking these questions of our spouses, I think, is super important. Next one, okay, thank you. Does she need comfort? Sometimes, I think John Townsend talked about the well. He talks about, some people just need to know that you're in the well. So if you fell into a well, if you do that image, you fall into this well and somebody is up there saying, hey, here's a rope. Some people don't want to grab the rope. They want you to jump in the well and just know that you're in the well with them. And comfort our spouse. It's not something I'm good at. Even when my wife says, like, man, I'm not feeling good, not sick. I'm like, well, did you drink a lot of water today? You taking your vitamins? What's your exercise regimen been? It's not often, the solution. All right, Kevin, the next one. Does she need sex? Next one. Yes. Probably not this one. Definitely don't start with this one. All right, for giggles, who's gone there? Who's gone there? Okay, all right. So anyway, I figured we're on like middle of the slide. It's never anyway. Next. All right, with our employees. All right, next one. Don't avoid leaders lead. I know this comment of leaders leading is kind of an overused statement, but I think when I recently, over the past couple years, I have the blessing. One of the cool things about working for the company that I work for, right? A little background: Amphenol Network Solutions, the business unit that I'm responsible for. We sold Telect Incorporated. We sold the business, and what Mike was saying, we sold it in 2017 or 2019 to this 2017 to this company, one of the things that you gain out of being, our business is super diverse and flat. So I run one of 135 businesses. And so we're not integrated in ERP systems. We're not, we don't have the same HR. We don't have the same culture. You could walk into an Amphenol office. It's a different color. It doesn't even have the same Amphenol brand. We're a cluster, but that's why we say we're better than everybody else. But one of the blessings that I have is I get to actually gain, you talked about the worldwide manager meeting when I spoke, like I get to gain a lot of experience from other general managers that are running individual entities that go through all these challenges and that have done it a lot better and a lot longer than me. And our most profitable business actually in our company is in our group. And this guy has been with the company, I think, for 43 years. I think he's going to retire here shortly. But he brought this up of like leaders lead, and he did it in a condescending manner with one of the newer GMs that didn't know what they were doing. But he brought this up, and I really thought about it when he brought it up in that context of how many times am I avoidant to make a decision? And sometimes it's because I have something more important to go on. Or it's something that maybe I don't feel comfortable with. And Mike shared the story. Thank you for sharing it because it saved me a little bit of time. But shared the story of the conversation that my dad and I had between where do we take this business from a strategic perspective. And I watched this, and as a young guy, I know I'm still young, but as really young and dumb, I was like, this is a no-brainer. Right? I went in I put my lawyer hat on. I'm not a lawyer, won't try to be. But I put my lawyer hat on. I'm like, why? I gave him all the reasons, like why? But emotionally, how often do we have emotions take over what the right decision is? And so I started thinking about this, like it's super easy, and that's the cool thing, again, about where I work, is I get to look at all these guys' P&Ls. So they throw their numbers up there, and then they throw their strategy up there, and I'm just like, oh, I wouldn't do that. And you start looking at it, and you're like, what? And there's got to be an emotional reason they don't make the decision because it's so clear so many times. I see these guys out there, they're like, oh, yeah, I think we should do this, this, and this. And it's like, no, that business is dying. You should kill it. But they won't do it because there's this emotional tie to it. And I know I'm talking about running a business right now, which isn't really the topic, but avoidance often with our employees is the number one thing I do because of emotions. And the most recent story I can think about in our business is we had this sales guy who's not a good sales guy. We knew it, but he was the nicest guy, salt of the earth, and we employed him for 4 years. He didn't land a deal. It's a lot of money. You start dialing in and think about what his salary is and all the benefits and everything else like that. You start looking at that, and that's probably, say $500,000 that we wasted on never landing a sale. Why? Because he was a good guy, and every single time his name got brought up in the executive room, we didn't have the tough conversation with him of, you have 1 quarter to make it work. What did that do for everybody else who said they had a project that could have made the company better, made them more money, allowed us to hire more people, impact our community, pay our suppliers, do all the impact that we could have had with that $500,000, but instead I let my emotions, our executive team let our emotions get in the way of having that conversation when we need to have it. I think this is the number one, in my opinion, this is the number one failure from leadership that I see happen often in my own business. I've done it a billion times of don't avoid. Go straight at it. It might suck. If you have to start the day out, start I forget what I heard. I'm not even gonna try the metaphor. But start your day out with the hard part. Don't wait till a Friday. Start a Monday morning and go have the tough conversation and figure out what needs to happen because it's impacting the rest of your employees. All right, next. Honesty always. Again, this is another area that I've been able to see working with other businesses. We had a workshop come together, and we had a scenario where this guy's like, hey, yeah, we're going to shut down our Kansas City facility and we're going to move it all to Mexico. And I'm like, okay, cool. I get what you're doing, and I see why. The cost structure didn't make sense. And I'm like, so what have you told your employees? Oh, we told them we're not doing that. I was like, really? And he's like, yeah, there's some rumors kind of going around. And I'm like, so how do you think they'll trust you next year after you do it? And he looked at me, he's like, well, do you think I should tell them? They're all gonna lose their jobs. I'm like, yeah, you should tell them. Find your key individuals, give them a plan that makes it financially beneficial for them to stay on during the transition period, but be honest with them, because they're never gonna believe you again as a leader if you try to hide anything. And I think transparency, the number one survey result we got from our employees of why they liked working for our company was because we're transparent. When things suck, you tell your employees they suck. And I think that's something I definitely, I don't know where the camera is, but I can look at over there. I can look at Wayne. Wayne modeled very well. When things sucked, we're gonna show you the financials on the screen, and everybody in the room, we're in it together. And that's the only way we get out. And I think from a leader perspective, we need to make sure we do it. It's 100%. That's why, yeah. I am not going to pardon my son. Wait, is that too soon? Sorry. I can make equal ones on the other side, by the way. Nobody trusts anything. All right, speak with love. Speak with love. They are human too, and they do need Christ. The best example here, again, I've learned a lot of wisdom from Wayne, so he should be given this presentation. But I remember I was able to use this with my director of engineering, pass this wisdom along. My director of engineering we did a restructure. Our business wasn't doing as well as we needed to be, and we knew we needed to put resources towards sales, so we had to make some cuts in other areas, and we did that. And our director of engineering, he's brand new in the role, second year in the role, or maybe first year. And I think he may have only been 4 months. And I'm like, hey, we're doing a restructure. And we wanted one of your guys, and he knew which one needed to be let go. And he's like, hey, he called me the week before we were going to make the decision. And he's like, hey, I just found out. He just told me, we just had a one-on-one, and he told me, we just bought our first house, and my wife's pregnant. And I was like, oh, okay, and I'm like, that can't impact your decision. And he's like, I know, it's really hard. And I said, but the one thing, and this is what Wayne always said, the one thing that cannot come out of your mouth when you look across the table is you cannot say, "This is hard for me too." And I remember that every single time that we have to make a tough decision, it's harder for them, or just as hard for them. And when we walk into any of these conversations, it might suck. It does suck. And if it doesn't suck, you should quit your job as a leader. Seriously, if you don't feel sick to your stomach when you have to let somebody go, you should quit your job. Just like Alan Jackson said, "I will quit performing the moment I don't get butterflies when I walk on stage." If we lose that feeling inside, we lose that empathy, we lose that sympathy. And I see this happen often, and we do have leaders. I think that guy that has worked for a company for 43 years probably does enjoy firing people. You know what I mean? He probably should quit the job. I think he is retiring, which is probably a good thing for his employees. But yeah, I think this is the area as journeymen, we're all trying to get better as leaders. We're all trying to get better to be able to be that light in our workplace, and we will never be that light in our workplace unless we do this one thing. All right. Okay. This right here, we talked about a lot, but having that difficult conversation does not mean you do not love that person. It actually is the opposite. You love them enough to give them the feedback. Whether that's terminating them, whether that's saying, "Hey, we gotta right this wrong. You got to start performing better. You got to do this." Early on in my marriage, and I'm going to tie the two, my wife and I, we've actually reversed in our roles from our, not in our genders, but in our roles. We reversed in the fact that I used to be like cool with brushing everything under the rug, and she was like opposite, or she was like, "No, we're going to talk about this and we're going to be direct." Now we're complete opposite. But I remember what I realized. I came back from the Townsend leadership thing, and I realized that my wife was being emotionally robbed because I wasn't telling her my feelings. So even though I thought it was better to be like, "No, okay, I'll just take that hit, take that punch, and not tell you and not give that response." And I think from a leadership perspective, that's the same way. Why would somebody want to operate in an environment if they're not doing well and they're not giving that feedback? You know, they say a trained dog is happier than a non-trained dog because they know the rules, they know the guidelines, and they can live the life around it. And as leaders, again, avoid, avoid, avoid. Run, run, run. All right, the next two are easy. We can jump to the next. All right, next one, Kevin, because they're the same. And this one's pretty quick, but, did I miss the first one? Oh, okay. With others, protect the relationship if it's not toxic. If it's toxic, I would absolutely say run for the woods. But anytime I've had conflict with my friends, with my brother, with my sister, with any of these, I put these others, making sure we're keeping relationship first. You know, this is how Christ wanted us to love. And I think often I go into fix-it mode of I'm not doing, or defensive mode, I'm not doing this, they're doing this, da-da-da. If they would fix this, then everything would be better. But understanding in any of these relationships we need to be going in, or any other relationships, I put others because we would go all day if I put everyone on the list. We got to keep that relationship first. The next, honesty always. Again, don't hold things back. Again, it's unfair to the person you're talking to. And if we're not direct, and I think that's where I fail most in my communication, that's why often I follow up every one-on-one tough conversation with an email. So I have two layers, not for HR reasons, also for HR reasons, but not just for HR reasons, but so there's two levels of communication, because I know one of my faults is often I can give that really tough feedback, and then I circle back and tell them how much that they're good at, and then they forget that tough feedback. And so making sure that tough feedback is stated very clearly in a different form of communication. And I don't know, probably say 20% of the tough conversations I've had with our employees that they've had to course correct, 20% of them come back and be like, whoa, I didn't know it was this bad. I'm like, okay, well then I guess we have to have a follow-up conversation. because they read it and they're like, whoa, that wasn't because I always want to be the nice guy in there and like make sure that they're feeling good. But making sure we're honest and clear. All right, the next three are the same. But speaking with love, remembering they're human. All right, and they're going through things that we don't know. Like the only reason my director of engineering knew that guy was pregnant and bought the first house is because he chose to tell him, not assuming that you could have let somebody else go that just found out they're diagnosed with cancer. You could have had a tough conversation with somebody that struggling with their spouse and their relationship. We don't know that. All right, next. All right, authority. First one. This is something, there's a song, I think it's Champion by Brandon Lake and Maverick City Music, but that song was really great for me. Is God's given us the authority. We already have that authority, and I know it's in the Bible, but I just listen to worship music instead. It's better. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. I do both. But yeah, God's given us the authority to overcome the enemy, and we need to make sure we understand who our enemy is. Our enemies are not our employees, they're not our spouses, they're not our kids, they're not anything else. He didn't give us the authority to overcome these relationships. He gave us authority to overcome the enemy. And I think in many instances, and this is a Stephen Furtick quote. This was a couple years back, Stephen Furtick, not recent. But you did a sermon, and I thought it was really good, and it's helped me a lot in these difficult, challenging communication scenarios and work. It's not what you're going into, it's who you're going in with. And knowing that you have the authority, knowing that no matter what, nothing's going to touch you, I don't know, it makes me feel a lot more confident. It makes me be able to look in the mirror in a humble manner and say, this is me, and not just me, God's with me. I have that authority, I have that on that shoulder. I don't need to prove it to anybody. I just need to walk in the room knowing that authority's there. All right, second right here, greatest commandment. We got Matthew 22:37 through 38. Loving God allows us to love others. And I think that's what Journeyman is all about. If I just break it down to, we are asked to be leaders, and we're asked to continue to drive towards God's kingdom and hopefully bring more people to him. We can't do that unless we love God ourselves. And so I'd ask us all to really think about what Journeyman's going to be this year for us, and what our relationships with each other that are going to make us look upward, right? We all like hanging out with each other, but making sure we're always going back to, we're not going to be able to be loving, and we're not going to be able to have that conversation we need to have if we don't look upward together as men. And last, I hate to say it, he doesn't just ask us to love God, he does ask us to love others. And we need to remember that as we go into these conversations. So to finish it up, last slide. Jesus Christ set the bar for communication, and he warns us of the consequences of poor communication. And humbly, I can stand up here, and my gravestone, I don't know if you noticed, but my gravestone did not show our financial results on them, right? It didn't show that we grew by X% and we made this much money on the bottom line, and I did this. And so I appreciate very much, Mike, the accolades out of the beginning, but I can say that I fail a lot at communication. And so I'm really blessed that I had an opportunity to talk with you guys on something I'm still working on myself. And this was really, really beneficial for me to kind of go through and be like, man, Jesus never modeled any of my favorite communication methods. And I think that's my hope of what we can all walk out of here today. So thank you guys.